My heating bill last winter was $230 for 1 month. I nearly choked when I saw the number. My house is not even that big, but the gas furnace was running nonstop, and I was still wearing a sweater inside. I had a choice. I could pay the bill, or I could find a way to stay warm without emptying my bank account. So I started researching cheap heating alternatives. And I found the video that claimed you could heat an entire room using nothing but a few terracotta pots and some candles. It looked ridiculous. A stack of clay pots over some tea lights. How could that possibly produce enough heat to warm a room? But the comments were filled with people who swore by it. They said it worked like a mini radiator. They said it saved them hundreds of dollars. I was skeptical, but I was also desperate. So I decided to build one myself. The materials cost me about $20. A commercial space heater would cost me $220. That meant I could save $200 if this actually worked. But I had no idea about thermodynamics. I had no idea about convection currents. And I had absolutely no idea how dangerous a simple candle could be when you can find its heat. So I built it, I tested it, and I learned a lesson that almost burned my house down. This is not a sponsored video. I bought every material with my own money, and honestly, I wish someone had warned me about the physics of trapped heat before I lit that first match. Let me give you some context about how much we rely on forced air heating. Most homes in the United States use gas furnaces that blow hot air through ducts. They are efficient, but they are also expensive to run, especially when the temperature drops below freezing. The average household spends about $1,000 a year on heating. That is a massive chunk of the budget for most families. The clay pot heater, also known as a candle heater, works on a simple principle. Heat rises. When you light a candle, the flame produces a small amount of heat, roughly enough to warm your hands. But if you place a terracotta pot over that flame, the pot traps the heat, absorbs it, and then slowly radiates it out over a much larger surface area. The idea is that a single candle can heat a clay pot to over 300 degrees Fahrenheit, and that pot then acts like a radiator, warming the surrounding air. It sounded plausible. The internet said it worked, but the internet also said you could fix a headlight with cooking oil, and we all know how that turned out. I bought 3 terracotta pots, a bag of sand, a metal wire rack, a metal tray, and a pack of 12 tea light candles. The total cost was about $22. The commercial electric space heater I was eyeing cost $220. The potential savings were huge. I set up the experiment in my garage. I wanted to make sure I had plenty of ventilation and a fire extinguisher nearby, just in case. I placed the metal tray on a sturdy wooden table, arranged 12 tea light candles in a circle, and lit them. The flames flickered and danced, creating a small, warm glow. Then I placed the metal wire rack over the candles and placed the largest terracotta pot upside down on top of the rack. The idea was that the pot would trap the heat from the candles. I placed a smaller pot on top of that, and then an even smaller pot on the very top to create a chimney effect. I also placed a thin layer of sand inside the pots to help retain the heat. I waited 15 minutes and then I touched the side of the pot with a thermometer gun. The temperature was already over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. I was impressed. I moved my hand closer and I could feel the heat radiating strongly. It felt like a real space heater. I measured the temperature of the garage. It had been 50 degrees when I started. After 1 hour, it had risen to 65 degrees. That is a 15-degree rise, using nothing but a dozen candles and some clay pots. I was ecstatic. The math was simple. 12 candles cost about $2. If I ran the heater for 8 hours a day, it would cost me roughly $16 a week. That is about $64 a month. Compared to my $230 gas bill, I was saving over $160 a month. Over the course of the winter, that could be nearly $1,000. I felt like I had discovered a secret. I moved the heater into my living room, placed it on a non-flammable surface, and let it run for the evening. The room was noticeably warmer. The cold draft in the corner vanished. I sat next to it and read a book. It was genuinely comfortable. But then I decided to check the temperature of the pot again. I pointed the thermometer gun at the side of the pot, and the reading made my eyes widen. It was now over 480 degrees Fahrenheit. That is hotter than the inside of a pizza oven. That is hot enough to ignite wood if it came into contact for a sustained period. I moved the thermometer to the top of the stack, and the chimney effect had pushed the temperature to over 500 degrees. I was sitting 2 feet away from a metal surface that was hot enough to melt aluminum. The wire rack, which was holding the pot, was glowing a faint red. Not bright red, but a dull, dangerous red. I realized what was happening. The terracotta pots were trapping the heat so effectively that the metal rack was overheating. The candles were not just heating the air, they were heating the metal, and the metal was heating the pots, and the pots were radiating heat back to the metal. It was a feedback loop that was rapidly approaching the melting point of steel. I quickly turned off the candles, blew them out, and let the whole contraption cool down. I was shaking, not because I was cold, but because I realized I had almost created a fire hazard in my own living room. I waited for the pots to cool completely, which took almost 2 hours. When I finally disassembled the setup, I noticed something disturbing. The wire rack had warped. The metal had permanently deformed under the heat. The bottom of the largest pot had a hairline crack, likely from the thermal shock, and the wooden table underneath, although protected by the metal tray, had a slight scorch mark in the center. I had come within inches of starting a house fire. I decided to repeat the experiment, but this time with extreme caution. I moved the setup to my driveway on a concrete surface, away from any flammable materials. I placed a professional-grade heat shield underneath the tray. I used a fire extinguisher within arm's reach, and I measured the temperature every 10 minutes. The results were consistent. The pot reached 400 degrees within 20 minutes, and stabilized at around 450 degrees after an hour. The room temperature rose by about 10 degrees in a closed space. But here is the problem. The heat was intensely localized. The pot was hot enough to fry an egg, but the rest of the room, it was only moderately warmer. The heat did not spread evenly. It created a hot spot around the pot, but the corners of the room remained cooled. I calculated the efficiency. A single tea light candle produces about 30 watts of heat. 12 candles produce 360 watts. A small electric space heater typically produces 1500 watts. So the candle heater was producing less than a quarter of the heat of a modern electric heater, but it was concentrating that heat into a single point that was dangerously hot. It was inefficient, it was unsafe, and it was honestly terrifying. I wanted to see if I could make it safer. I tried using larger candles, like votive candles, which have a higher wax content and burn for longer. The heat output increased, but so did the risk. The votive candles melted the wax and spilled it over the metal tray, creating a dangerous pool of liquid wax that could easily ignite. I tried using a single large candle, a pillar candle, and placed the pot directly over it. The heat was more controlled, but it took longer to warm the room. After 2 hours, the temperature had only risen by 6 degrees. I also tried using a small fan to distribute the heat more evenly. The fan helped spread the warm air, but it also cooled the pot down, reducing the radiant heat effect. The net result was barely any improvement. I also tested a different design, a simple terracotta pot with a metal pipe running through it, heated by a propane burner. That worked much better. The temperature rose quickly, and the heat was more consistent. But Using propane defeats the purpose of a cheap off-grid heater. Propane is expensive and it requires a gas canister. The whole point of the clay pot heater was supposed to be cheap and accessible. The only scenario where this made sense was a power outage in the dead of winter. If you are stranded without electricity and you have a pack of candles, this device could keep a single room warm enough to prevent hypothermia. It could save a life. But it could also burn your house down if you are not careful. I tested it for a full 8-hour run, monitoring it the entire time. The wax from the candles melted completely, and the wicks burned out after about 6 hours. The heat dropped rapidly after that, so you would need to constantly replace the candles, which means constant supervision. You cannot leave this thing unattended. You cannot sleep while it is running. And you definitely cannot leave it near children or pets. Now, let me give you the final numbers. A commercial electric space heater costs about $220. My clay pot candle heater cost $22. That is a saving of almost $200 in upfront cost. But the operating cost is where the trap lies. The electric space heater runs on electricity, which costs about 30 cents an hour. The candle heater uses 12 tea light candles per hour, which costs about $2 an hour. That means the candle heater is 7 times more expensive to run. Over the course of a month, the candle heater would cost about $200 in candles alone. The electric heater would cost about $40. So the savings were an illusion. The clay pot heater saved me money on the purchase, but it cost me a fortune to operate. And it was dangerously hot. I saved $200 on the purchase, but I would have lost that money in operating costs within the first week. I tested the electric space heater side by side with the clay pot heater in the same room. The electric heater raised the room temperature by 15 degrees in 30 minutes. The clay pot heater took 2 hours to raise it by 10 degrees, and the electric heater was cool to the touch. The clay pot heater was a burn hazard. I am not exaggerating when I say that this device is one of the most dangerous DIY projects I have ever tested. The heat is so intense that it can cause third-degree burns on contact. The metal rack glows red. The wax can catch fire. And if the pot cracks, the flames can escape and ignite anything nearby. The internet is full of people promoting this as a free energy hack, but they never show the smoke, the warped metal, or the scorched table. They never show the moment when the thermometer reads 500 degrees and you realize you are sitting next to a bomb. Does this clay pot heater actually work? Yes, it produces heat, but it produces heat in a way that is dangerous, inefficient, and expensive. Is it a good way to save money? No. The candles cost more than the electricity you are trying to save. Should you build one? Absolutely not. Unless you are in a survival situation with no other option, you should never use this device. You are better off buying a cheap electric space heater, paying the electricity bill, and staying safe. The most important thing I learned from this experiment is that not all DIY hacks are created equal. Some are ingenious, some are harmless, and some are waiting to burn your house down. The clay pot heater falls into the third category. It is a physics lesson wrapped in a fire hazard. It proves that heat rises, but it also proves that heat can destroy. If you enjoyed this experiment and you want to see more real tests like this, you need to commit to this channel right now. Subscribe to Overlooked and hit that notification bell because I test the hacks that nobody else dares to try, and I show you the truth, whether it works or fails. Trust me, you will not want to miss the next experiment. If you have ever built a clay pot heater, or if you have any other dangerous DIY stories, let me know in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your experiences, good or bad. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the cheapest fix is the most expensive mistake. You just have to be willing to look past the flame and see the fire. See you in the next one.